And Jesus asked his disciples what other people were saying about him. The answers came fast and easy. John the Baptist, one of the prophets, Elijah. And though Mark doesn't record other options, and perhaps the disciples didn't share them, I'm sure there were several less flattering opinions circulating around about just who Jesus was. A fraud, maybe. A heretic. A madman. Maybe even a spoiled man-child who still believes the wild stories his mother told him about his birth. It's always easy to share what other people are saying, the scuttlebutt, the gossip, the latest opinions. And the disciples were eager to tell Jesus what others thought and were saying. But then when Jesus asked, "What about you? Who do you say that I am?" I can imagine a long silence before Peter bravely says what they were all thinking, but nobody up to that point had spoken aloud. "You are the Messiah." And with those 4 words, this morning's gospel reading, we have come to a decisive hinge point in the Gospel of Mark. Everything that Mark has told us about Jesus in the first half of his gospel has been leading us to this statement by Peter, this confession. Everything that happens from here on in the gospel is going to be the consequence of this confession. You are the Messiah. Those 4 words out of Peter's mouth and what they mean for Jesus and for us are really at the heart of this gospel story. You are the Messiah. In Matthew's gospel, those same 4 words out of Peter's mouth become the confession that Jesus says he's going to build his church on. The echo of those words is what has brought us all here today. But clearly Mark tells us what Peter thought those words meant and what Jesus thought those words meant were 2 very different things. Jesus responded to Peter's declaration with his own understanding of what a Messiah would be and do. Namely, to undergo great suffering, to face rejection, to be killed, and then rise again. For the very first time, Jesus predicts his crucifixion. And he went on to say that followers of such a Messiah must be ready to deny themselves, to take up the cross and follow, to put the needs of others before their own selfish interests, to find life by giving their lives themselves away. He said that following him would be something worth more than life itself. And so Peter is quick to let Jesus know that none of that is what his 4 words meant. At least not in his mind. Seeing Jesus suffer and die was the last thing Peter wanted. And for that, Jesus sharply calls Peter the devil. "Get behind me, Satan," is what he says. Pointing us back to when Satan appeared earlier in Mark's gospel. It was right after Jesus' baptism, right after that voice from heaven said pretty much the same thing that Peter had said, the voice of God telling Jesus, "You are my beloved Son." Immediately after hearing those words, Mark tells us that Jesus was driven into the wilderness where the meaning of that voice from heaven was tested by the devil. It seems that now Jesus heard that same tempter speaking again in the words of Peter. You could be famous, Jesus. You could rule the world, Jesus. You could have anything you want, Jesus. In Peter's mouth there was, "No, Jesus, don't talk about suffering. Don't talk about dying. That can't be what Messiah means." It seems that every time Jesus comes face to face with his identity as Son of God, as Messiah, Satan is waiting there to offer him a more tempting way to understand that title and the path it put Jesus on. So it seems to me that Mark is inviting us in this middle chapter of his book to see Jesus coming to this kind of clarity himself, gaining focus, and committing himself fully to this particular understanding of being Messiah. One that would lead him to the cross, as well as articulating at the same time what it would mean for those who would follow him and become his church. So even though preachers, including me, usually use this text as an opportunity to ask their congregations the same question that Jesus asked his disciples, who do you say Jesus is? But I'm going to invite you to focus instead on Jesus' own answer to that question and think about, who does Jesus say that he is? Who does Jesus think he is? One of the many paradoxes of our Christian faith is this claim that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine at one and the same time. That he was as human as you and me, and yet at the same time the eternal and all-knowing creator of the universe. Now how those two natures could coexist in him is a mystery we don't claim to fathom. But at least for today, and for this portion of Mark's Gospel, I'm going to propose that we lean more toward the human Jesus and suggest that instead of knowing clearly and fully since his baptism, or perhaps even from his birth, everything that was to come and where his life was headed, that Mark seems to be describing for us the moment when it all became fully clear to Jesus. And that this first prediction of his passion is really also the first time Jesus himself fully knew that the cross was his destiny, where his life was headed. And I say that's where Mark leads us because if you remember last Sunday when Dennis reflected on the strange story of the Gentile woman who was begging Jesus to heal her daughter, he spoke of Jesus then in very human terms also as being tired, eager for respite, a time away, a chance to get away from the pressing crowds and their needs. And then shows up this woman. And Jesus responds in a most un-Jesus-like way. It's not right to throw the children's food to the dogs. Remember that? As Dennis explained, Jesus at that point likely believed deeply that he was sent only to rescue the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Perhaps a mission to the Gentiles would follow, but his focus now was on his own people. But then in that story that just precedes today's, an amazing thing happens. This Gentile woman preaches to Jesus his own gospel. She asks for the compassion and inclusion that Jesus had been at least implying and often practicing himself. And Jesus changes his mind. Jesus changes course. He understands in a new way how even dogs get the crumbs, how Jesus heals the girl. And most importantly, that new insight somehow triggers in Jesus this new and fuller awareness of what being Messiah was going to mean. At least the way Mark tells it. It changes who Jesus thinks he is. All of which now would be just interesting Bible study if we didn't then look at what it means for us. What this way Jesus came to this new understanding of who he was means for the way that we come to understand who we are as his disciples. And for that this morning, I think we get some help from Isaiah in the first reading, which speaks of God's servant as a teacher who knows, but also as a student who is still learning. Listen to that reading again. The Lord God has given me the tongue of a teacher, that I may know how to sustain the weary with a word. Morning by morning he wakens my ear to listen as those who are taught. Now, did you hear that shift? The tongue of a teacher awakened daily to listen and learn as one who is being taught, like a student. The Lord God has opened my ear. I was not rebellious. I did not turn backward. I gave my back to those who struck me and my cheeks to those who pulled out the beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting. The Lord God helps me, therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. So Jesus was a teacher, a Messiah, yet still learning daily what that identity meant and where it would lead. Which makes us as disciples of Jesus, as his church likewise, both teachers who have something to share with our neighbors and world, but also students still learning daily what it means to take up our cross and follow Christ. In other words, I don't need to claim to know or much less explain to you what it means to say that when I most want to save my life is when I most risk losing it. Or that losing my life for Jesus' sake and for the sake of the gospel is what's going to save it. I don't need to know why gaining the whole world might mean forfeiting my life. I just need to be ready to learn each day and in every circumstance what that might mean right then and there in the choices that I face. Because if Jesus could learn each day, as his life and circumstances taught him, what that key and central truth about his life, what that identity as Messiah was really going to mean, then I too can be a lifelong student of my own baptism, of my identity of a child of God in Christ, and what it means to take up my cross and follow. We can think this weekend of those first responders who went to work on a sunny September day in New York 20 years ago, or the people who boarded Flight 93. They did not know how selfless their life would need to be that day, how much they would risk for the sake of others, until it suddenly became clear in a ball of fire. Which is why I think this entire passage ends with a word about shame, a warning about being ashamed of Jesus and his words. There is no shame in not having full understanding, not having perfect faith, not exhibiting flawless discipleship, if your identity is as a daily learning disciple. Peter made a bold confession, but he didn't know what it meant or what he was saying when he rebuked Jesus for speaking about that cross. Still, there was no shame in that. It wasn't so much Peter that Jesus rebuked for those words, but the devil who used them to again tempt Jesus toward a different path. There's likewise no shame for us when the best that we can say is that our Christian identity, our faith, and our discipleship remains a mystery that we are growing into, still figuring out, still discovering each new day. Despite being in my 70th year of life now, and my next weekend starting my 44th year of ordained ministry, I feel no shame in saying that I don't fully know yet what it means that when I most want to save my life is when I most risk losing it. And how losing my life for Jesus' sake and for the sake of the gospel will save me. But I hear those words, and I'm ready to learn each day what they mean, and in every circumstance what they might mean right then and there in the choices that I face. Because for me and for you and for all disciples of Jesus, there is no shame